Shalom, Yashar'al. What's happening? Okay, in this video, I want to talk to you about the two separate accounts of creation concerning Adam. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you compare the Adam mentioned in Genesis chapter 1 to the one mentioned in Genesis chapter 2, something doesn't line up. We're going to take a look at those differences in this video, so let's begin, shall we? Okay. If you take a look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 11, 12, and 13, it says that God put forth vegetation, plants, trees, all of these with seed would bring forth vegetation, and this came about on the third day. Now if you skip down to verses 20, 21, and 22, it says that God formed creatures in the water and out of the water. The ones out of the water are those that fly in the air. He created flying birds, sea creatures, and all of this took place on the fifth day. Then it says that he formed the cattle, the creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and it was so on the sixth day. And then shortly after that, on that same day, God made or created Adam. Genesis 1:26 says that God said, "Let us." Who is this us? Who is this us being mentioned in Genesis 1:26? So there's more than one being present with God. Could be more than one in God's presence, saying, "Let us create man in our image, after our likeness." Then it says, let mankind, or this kind of man, have dominion over the fish of the sea, birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth. So everything man had dominion of was formed first. Then man was created, according to Genesis 1:26. Genesis 1:27 says that God created man, or this kind of man, in his own image. In the image of God he created him, semicolon, meaning there's a lot more than what is being mentioned in this verse. So he created this kind of man, male and female, he created them. These type of men. Now, is this saying that man was male and female, meaning separate genders, or is this saying that this kind of man is male and female in one body? Why do I say that? Because I'm going to show you in another account of Genesis from the Targum how there's an interesting reference to this type of man being indeed male and female in one body. This is not saying that male and female, meaning separate genders, were created for this type of man. Okay, now compare that Adam we just read about in Genesis chapter 1 to the one mentioned in Genesis chapter 2. Okay, this is chapter 2 of Genesis. These are the generations of the heaven and the earth when they were created. Another account of the creation. Wow. In the day that the Lord God, notice, here is being mentioned Lord, God, not just God. Is that letting us know that this is a different being forming and creating? We'll see. It says here that no plant of the field was yet in the earth, no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the ground, but a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. Okay, so I just read verses 5 and 6 of Genesis chapter 2. So, no vegetation was in the earth according to this account in Genesis chapter 2, and there was no man. Then it says in verse 7 that the Lord God, not just God, it's mentioning another being. Lord God, formed, not created, formed. It says formed. Let's go back. Genesis 1:26, or I should say 1:27. It says that God created, not formed. So this man in Genesis 1:27 was created. The 1 and 2:7 was formed from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. He received the breath of life and he became a living being. Notice the man in Genesis 2:7 was formed first, then came the animals. Genesis 2:18, 19, and 20 says that then the Lord God said that it was not suitable for this man to be alone. He would make him helpers. Verse 19 said that out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field, every bird of the air. Wait a minute. I thought the birds of the air and the beasts of the field were already created before man. Isn't that what Genesis chapter 1 says? Yep. It says that the sea creatures, the birds of the air, and the beasts of the field, the cattle, the creeping things, were formed first. Then Adam was created in Genesis 1:26 and 1:27. So who could this other Adam be? Or who could the Adam in Genesis 1:26 and 27 being mentioned be? And what is the difference between this God being mentioned in Genesis 1:26 and 1:27 and the God, Lord God, being mentioned in Genesis 2:7? The one that formed, not created. He formed man of the dust from the ground. So he formed man first, then the animals. So it's not the same Adam. There's two different Adams being mentioned here. That again, the Adam in Genesis chapter 1 is not the same as the one in Genesis chapter 2. Because if it was, then it wouldn't have mentioned the animals, the birds, and the sea creatures being formed after. Because according to Genesis chapter 1, the sea creatures, the birds of the air, were already formed before Adam of Genesis chapter 1 was created. They were there on the fifth day. So what's going on with this? Something doesn't add up. There's a God that said, let us, who is this us that we don't know about, make this kind of man in our image, male and female. What is that? Is that saying there's two genders, or is this saying that there's two genders in one body for this kind of man? And then if you pay attention, Genesis chapter 2 specifically mentions Lord God, not just God. So there are two gods. Where am I getting at with this? is that once you make the separation between Adam of Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, you'll see that there are two different kind of species that exist. The Adam in Genesis 1, 26 and 27, it's not the same one as the one in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7. The God being mentioned in Genesis chapter 1 verses 26 and 27 might not be the same one being mentioned in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7. And all the other verses, like verse 5 of Genesis chapter 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into the Targum of Jonathan, and I'm going to show you the differences between these atoms, okay? But for now, just soak in what I'm telling you and look into that. You'll see the differences. They're there. One atom was formed, the other atom was created. One atom was formed by the Lord God. The other atom was created by God and the other beings that were present with him. So there are differences. And I'm going to open up these verses that are cryptic. All these verses with semicolons, they're not revealing to us enough details. So I'm going to point us to another source that is very credible, that'll help us clear the confusion. And you guys are going to be shocked at the differences between these two atoms. So that's all I got for this video. Look into what I'm saying, and there's no doubt about it that the atom in Genesis chapter 1 is not the same one as the one in Genesis chapter 2, because the animals, the birds, the sea creatures were formed first, then came the atom of Genesis chapter 1. And in Genesis chapter 2, Adam was formed first, then came the animals of the land, the air, and the sea. And he named them. So we need to figure out what is going on with this. I know some of you have heard about this, but if you're like me, I couldn't quite figure out what was the difference until I read the Targum of Jonathan. And that's what I want to do. I want to go there. But for now, just look into what I'm saying and tell me what you think. So that's it for this video. And until the next one, shalom.